was living in Bronxville when I was teaching at Sarah Lawrence. Before I was married, I used to be eating out in the restaurants of the town.
Joseph Campbell was a professor of literature and religion.
And one fine evening, I was in my favorite restaurant there.
He was teaching English. But what he really wanted to talk about, even when he was talking about, modern British novels or whatever, was the story beneath the myth,
benefiting humanity and suffering.
and started to write a book about the great hero stories. It looked at the way that hero stories have been told around the world as long as we have records of them. They follow these same basic patterns.
Life is always on the edge of death, always. And one should lack fear and have the courage of life. That's the principal initiation of all of the heroic stories.
What's the central story? Do you have a story that's...
In the late 70s, did a series of interviews with a gentleman by the name of Bill Moyers. And they had a great time. And Bill Moyers, at some point in the early 80s, looked up and said, "I'd love to have an extended interview with you." And over the course of the last 5 years of Campbell's life, they got together 3 or 4 times and filmed what would become a 6-hour documentary called The Power of Myth, which was a huge cultural phenomenon.
But this is the way in any artwork. You go to work and study
if you wanted to, ask people who had watched it, what do you remember about The Power of Myth? And the phrase that everybody would remember was a piece of teaching that he had come up with from an old Indian text that was "Follow your bliss."
So one way is to follow. I always tell my students, follow your bliss.
Follow your bliss?
Your bliss, where the deep sense of being in form.
It's wonderful to see the more traditionally minded Bill Moyers hear, follow your bliss for the first time and realize, this wasn't something that, was on his refrigerator. Joseph Campbell had been using the phrase, follow your bliss. We don't know when he started it, but he'd been doing that probably since the early 70s when he was still teaching college. And he had been talking about telling his students, follow your bliss. Don't listen to the money. Don't listen to what people tell you you should do. Look inside of yourself, and that should be the path that you take, that it's following the hero path, which is not an easy path necessarily. That was a journey that was perilous, that it was difficult, that it took you away from where you were and who you were, and forced you to re-examine everything.
How would you advise somebody to tap that spring of eternal life, that joy that is right there?
Well, we're having experiences all the time, which may, on occasion, render some sense of this, a little intuition of where your joy is. Grab it. No one can tell you what it's going to be. You've got to learn to recognize your own depths.
It's a funny thing, to think how much of an echo that one interchange has had, over the last 20-something years. It's pretty cool.